and the millions of people who annually visit the U.S. Capitol.
Hello, everyone. I'm MaryRose, I'm the Executive Director for NEL, and I'm in Virginia. Hello, I'm Ronelle. I'm the co host, and I'm from Indiana. Hey, everyone. I'm Mikey, and I'm here in Savannah, Georgia. I'm a CDI, a certified deaf interpreter for 11 years. Hello, I'm Ritchie Bryant. I'm in the DC area, and I'm a deaf interpreter. Hello, I'm Jason Herdich. I'm from South Carolina. I'm a certified deaf interpreter for 8 years from South Carolina. Welcome back to our discussion. We want to talk about our ideas that happened and what's happened since June and the changes that have been happening at the registering interpreters for the deaf. Would anyone like to comment? Oh, sure. Somewhat back in the month of June, we had a big discussion about the situation that's been happening with RID, the issues they've been having, and changes have happened since then. The RID board, president, vice president, and everyone else on the board has since resigned, and no one was left except for one deaf member at large. Since this time, there's been updates on the new performance tests and what the results are happening for the tests, and we're going to be talking about that as well. After all discussion, we decided to have a special election because we're coming close to a close date. So RD talked it over, and RD reviewed in California the special rules and regulation in the board, all the procedures that were needed. And so they set this special election. They didn't really make it a month or 2 months. They had a very short date within a few weeks instead of having a longer term between nominations and voting. So they gathered all the people that would run for it, nominations and so forth. During the process of the calling of, they made a process of getting nominations for RID. There are 2 applicants for the deaf president, 2 people running, 2 candidates. And this week they've had the vote, and they will announce on Monday who the winner is. And no matter who it is, we'll definitely have a deaf president of RID, which is very exciting. There are 2 people who are already been selected. For example, people have had no challenger and no other people running against them. So a few of the members will be by acclamation become members of the board, and we look forward to seeing what the new board looks like. And their term will start September 1st. And that's when the new board will start. So I'd like to ask the three of you, what's your hopes of what RD will be doing in the future? What is the best change? What things are changes? What change would be best for RID? Well, Jason mentioned that during this election on Monday, we will have a deaf president and we'll have a board on Monday, but it won't, I'm not sure it'll be a complete board. It won't have full board members on the board, but still will be able to keep going as a board. They'll be able to keep going as a board. There'll be more deaf involvement than ever before historically, and that means there'll be more transparency with the members in general. Yes, I know RD has had 16,000 hearing members and only 300, 400 members who are deaf. So the numbers are not in favor for deaf members yet. But of course, we have now more deaf people at the upper echelons in a hearing organization, a historically hearing organization. And in the hearing space, the deaf community has been able to be involved and challenge what the future will look like. So I have a positive feeling about that whole thing. And also, I want to mention that this whole thing that happened with the whole kerfuffle that happened with RD started way back when they put the CID on a certification test on hold because it's been outdated. So all the problems stem from there. Castley has since been established, and they are the entity that takes care of testing. They've taken that on their own. And so once a new test is ready, they'll be able to develop a test. There'll be deaf interpreters and hearing interpreters will be involved as well. It won't be like what RID has been in advance in the past. There are many questions that may not be pertain, but these new questions will pertain to the CPC and the experiences that interpreters had. The challenge is that we need to have 50 deaf interpreters to take the test so we can establish the measurements of the test to make sure that it is, as a test, is statistically sound. It's a slow process. And it's slowed down even more because of COVID. So things have closed down. People who want to take the test, they haven't been able to. So things have all been, people want to take it at the last minute. So, but they can't because they've been stuck because of COVID. So it's a real challenge to find the people who have test, and COVID has made it worse. Once we have those 50 people who have taken the test, then we can go on to get back to normal, so to speak. Back to normal, I guess. Hopefully, that'll happen in the future. Mikey commented out, his comments are great. One thing I'd like to point out, it's not normal. We have to move forward from what has been in the past. We have to transform ourselves, get ourselves into a new paradigm. Because RD has been faced with so many isms in the past. We can't go back to where we were and go to the same old things we've done before. We need a new RID. One that's inclusion. And really, RD should not be run by the board, not the headquarters. The leader is actually the CEO, and that's Star. So this is the responsibility of running RID. The board, the responsibility is really to really be able to look at and focus on the policy and procedures. Make sure that the policies are in order. The impact it may have on deaf consumers, that it may have a negative impact on the interpreters. That's the board's responsibilities. to make sure that the policies are in order. So, maybe policy and procedure. So, for example, the board may establish 3 top priorities that we want the headquarters to do. Something that we want to do year round. But the board really won't run that. They'll just make that decision. They'll just make decision for RID at the office to take care of that. You're talking about the positive changes that may come to RID. So, how can we break this down to have diversity and inclusion and partnership with other groups? How are we able to make this a reality? If you're going to have change, you've got to go through pain. You have to face what's going on and dialogue. You can't just go ahead and set some new policy without dialogue, with communication. Dialogue is sensitive. It's touchy. It's dangerous, but it's necessary. It's an onus that we have to take care of the problem. We have to dive in and figure out what's causing the issue and figure out how we can, what's the cause of that, so we don't repeat our mistakes in the past. Someone in the audience has a question. So if you want to join, it says if you were going to join Castley, you have to join RID? Does it mean you're paying 2 fees? RID is focused on taking care of certification. Castley's focus, their onus, is only about testing. RID's focus is on certification. So if you want the test price to be reduced at a lower fee, you become a member of RID. That will lower the cost of taking the test. It makes it cheaper. If you don't want to be, if before becoming certified, you don't want to become a member of RID, you can go right to take tests, but you're going to pay a higher fee. So I suggest that you join RID, because then you'll have a cheaper price when you actually take the test. RID members have that discount. And then if you pass the test, you pass the written test, then you pass the performance portion. Then all your results are given to RID, and RID will recognize that to give you your certification. And RID gives you the certification, and that makes you a certified member. And then you pay certified fees annually from then on. Plus, you need to take workshops, 80 hours every 4 years. It comes to they're calling it 80 hours, what they call 8.0, but it's every 4, the concept is 80 hours every 4 years. Mikey, is there anything you want to add? Yes. They are 2 separate entities. You pay, Jason was right about paying for the test. But is it worth it to pay for certification every year? It is. If the certification helps you with your job. So, for example, I am a freelance interpreter here in Georgia. Everywhere I go, I'm required to be certified. So if my certification were to lapse or be revoked, then I wouldn't be able to work. I know that there are some DIs who aren't certified, but being certified leads us to get more job opportunities. For example, legal assignments. If I'm certified, I can work in legal settings. If I'm not certified, or if it's terminated or revoked, I can't. So really, it's a sense of talking about continuing your knowledge your certification, you get your continuing educational units. You pay for that annual fee, and you have to have 80 hours every 4 years. And there's a transcript that you create that is created, so you're still aware of what's going on. Once you're it's not like you're certified and just pay your fees and not learn anything new. You must be aware of what's going on so you can stay abreast of the current trends in interpreting. So here's a question. You can read that, but a deaf candidate, if they're going to take the test, they're going to take a written. On the old test, whether you're hearing or deaf, hearing had took a test in English, and they did it. It was written in English. For the deaf, it was an English written test. Deaf person had a videotape that would sign the question that related to the videotapes. And on the new test, it's changed. It's sort of half and half in ASL and half in English. It's not just one, it's both, because the hearing must be able to recognize a question, understand a question in ASL, and then respond in ASL, just like a deaf person. So the goal is you are really proficient in both languages, ASL and English. But we also need to have that English component because that's a big component. We rely on English as part of our work. So that's the difference between the new test and the old test. I'm sorry, your screen is really fuzzy. Your screen is very I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. It's kind of if your screen is kind of if it's clear-ish. It's getting better. It's getting better. All right, just to clarify, clarify two parts. There are two parts to the exam. There's the written part and then the performance part. In the written part, it's both for hearing and deaf. They both take the same test, it's the exact same test. And it's included, like Ritchie was saying, the questions are given both in English and ASL. The performance tests are separate for the deaf and hearing candidates. Hearing candidates have to interpret from ASL to spoken English, where deaf people can't do that. So it means, for example, to pass, you pass the written test, and then you're going to take the performance test. You take the certified deaf interpreter performance exam. You're not taking the NIC, the National Interpreting Certification exam. That's the performance test for hearing people. So there are two different certification tests. Is that clear? So you're talking about hearing candidates giving their answer in ASL so you can observe different levels. But for deaf people, are you just looking to see if they're skilled and just place them if what they match in? So, for example, a legal setting or a medical setting or different specialties, do they do that? To answer Ronelle's question, the test is called an accessible minimum test. So we're looking for the minimum. We're not looking for the top level. We just need minimum test, a minimum entrance exam. So the special arenas are not included. That's a separate test for medical settings and for legal settings because they are much more complex. We're just focusing on the general act of interpreting. Here's another question. It's 60 questions in English and 60 questions in ASL. That's actually a comment, not a question. CASLI is just a certification center. No member fees, only test fees. Any more comments? Thank you, Regan, for giving those comments. So the test is not based on the legal setting or the medical field or platform field. The test doesn't cover that. It's minimum certification. So then you have options. So I took 2 medical interpreting. I focused on twice. I took the medical test. I took this test twice, and I feel pretty qualified to do that. I feel comfortable enough doing medical interpreting in medical field. So I've taken this medical exams. I did it for 6 months trainings. I took training, excuse me, not tests. So I can't say I know every nook and cranny of the field, but I'm pretty good at that. I feel okay with that. But you see, that shows the skills that we're continuing to practice. We have to keep going. If you're interested in legal interpreting, then you've got to go for quite some time. It's a long journey taking workshops and mentorship and doing observations and the whole lot. There's a lot to get into that specialty. Each specialty is a different idea of itself. But you've got to make some entrance. You say, hey, I'm certified, I'm here. But now look at all the options you have out there. And which direction you may go is up to the interpreter. Yeah, so Mikey just explained it's based on, say, interpreting for medical field. But so being that you have the specialty in medical interpreting and you're working with another interpreter who's hearing, whose specialty is interpreting, are you trying to make sure that you're both in line with each other, that there's transparency between the two of you? Oh, I'm sorry, you're kind of frozen. Could you say that again? Okay, sure. Mikey was just talking about that he has a specialty in medical interpreting. So I want to talk about hearing interpreters who have the specialty in medical interpreting. And what happens between the two of you in communication? Are you all on the same wavelength when you're translating stuff, when you're translating vocabulary, when you're giving clarity to the client? Is that tough? Does that make things easier? Do you make some sort of arrangements before you actually start the assignment? What's that like? You mean the difference between hearing and CDI? Yes. So the hearing interpreter is CDI. But when you're both in the same field at the same moment doing medical interpreting, how does that happen? What's the communication between the two of you? Well, I'll make this really simple. If you're not really familiar, hearing people will use the English language, and then they'll sign it in ASL. And based on my culture, and what they're getting stuff from hearing culture. So I'll give you an example. Suppose that a deaf patient on some like last treatment for some sort of, it's the last trial for their treatment, which means it's hopeless. So get that idea, right? So get that in your head, right? So hearing interpreter hears that, will say, I'm sorry to tell you this, that this treatment is not working. We couldn't find any other thing. And they're going on and on and on and on and on. That's what happened in hearing culture. The deaf people prefer that you're straight to the point. So if I'm there, I'm the CDI. In that situation, for that patient, if I was the patient, I would demand a CDI. If I was a patient, I'd want a CDI there. Because the CDI would tell me, Mikey, I'm going to tell you, the treatment is no good. It's hopeless. You're going to die soon. And sure, I'd be in shock. If it was me, of course I'd be in shock. but that would mean I would get full comprehension. So you don't want the patient to have to try and figure out what the meaning is. You want to get direct understanding. If I know the patient is in shock, a hearing person has that challenge because that's sort of challenge when a hearing person tries to tell that to a deaf person because of the culture difference. There's process time and all that information. So being a part of a team, usually as a team and I, we kind of understand each other. If I know it's like if we know that the end of these person's days are soon, we have already worked things out prior to actually going in. We know we're kind of in this together, and we know what our strategy is going to be. And when we act the assignment, when that thing happens, then we're able to support each other. It's not like you're just putting all the burden on that person alone. That's not the case. It's a team, and the team supporting me. So, but we have sort of that pre-conference meeting before the assignment, and that's the same thing for a press conference. So, for example, this hurricane is coming tomorrow in Louisiana, and so a hearing interpreter could be the great interpreter, but they're missing that deaf experience. And so, tomorrow it could be 12 to 14 inches of rain. It could be a storm. She'll be this tall, and the deaf person could see it as just information. But the thought hasn't come and gotten through to that person. Whereas a deaf person would say, hey, look, tomorrow your car could get like flooded by a tidal wave of water. That would get the point across to the deaf viewer. They know what that meant. That image of water cascading over their vehicle would get them out of their chairs and leave their homes. So really, that's the purpose of deaf culture in that situation, to get people to leave their homes because of the imminent storm. And it's because we've had the same life. We have the same experience as deaf people. Yeah, I support that all the way. In my experience, I'm not interpreting, but I had surgery, and I realized that I had a VRI interpreter. That was quite a task. I didn't have the glasses on; I really couldn't see, and I had my oxygen mask, so I really couldn't see. And my partner wasn't certified; had to interpret for me. Can you imagine that? It was awful. I'll never forget that part. So yes, I support what you're saying all the way. Hey, what happened? Why did everything stop? Well, now we're going to talk about what's the best thing to do for the future with our new president. What ideas do we have for the future? Anyone? Say a question again. I was a little blown off with the commercial. Kind of threw me off. Yeah, and we got interrupted in the middle of our thought. So, could you say the question again? You mean what I said before or just now? No, right from the commercial. You were telling some story, and all of a sudden, like it went to the commercial. Oh, okay, I'll go back. Yeah, I can go back. I said I support having a CDI all the way. I sold my experience, and so it really hit me hard. If you're deaf and disabled as well, how are they going to go through that? I think that really hit me hard. You're going to say something, going to add something? Now I'll add it. Throw it to you, Ritchie. Yeah, related to the issue of CDI, I think CDIs will benefit everyone, any situation. For example, if I'm in horrible pain, and my processing is not like now. Here I have a clear thought and I can sign. But if I'm in pain, my signing is going to be all out of straight. A hearing interpreter may have been through all the training, but it's still that interpreter's L2 is second language. So that interpreter may be able to catch everything when I'm signing things in an unorthodox way. A deaf interpreter would know everything through thick and thin. Maybe it's someone from a mainstream class. Maybe a person with language deprived. Maybe they've gone to some deaf school. But who knows? We've met all deaf community. I've met all these kind of people, and I know what that kind of deaf person is like, and I can rearrange myself and modify myself the way I'm signing to match that person, and I get my point across to each and every person. Even though you may have had every technical kind of signing, but I think everyone can use a CDI, including myself. Ritchie, you mentioned about gestures, signing, C, PSE. So a CDI has this whole range, a bag of tricks they can use. But what's really key is to meet the level and the needs of the deaf consumer. Maybe you may get some complex vocabulary. How then do you relate to people who are more gestural? Can you explain that process? Yeah, so you've got to think like hearing ASL interpreter, right? You got to think of a hearing ASL interpreter. They've had the training A to B. They go back and forth between languages. They think linearly between back and forth. That's how they think. Back and forth between language. That's their habit. A deaf interpreter does not think just think back and forth. For example, I go from A, let's say A is the doctor, B is the interpreter, C to D. So it's really a 3D structure that's going, and you have to think things of things being lengthened and thought out in a full picture. And I can make things in 3D because I have that big toolbox. I can draw. I have done tons of drawings in my time. For example, the diabetes shot, how you get the number, the dial that you make to make your injection for insulin. There's also ways that you can put it in. For example, put the insulin in, take the injection by arm or by leg. Or how about what the numbers are? I've drawn pictures to show the whole thing, and that person looks at all the pictures. And I draw a picture, and by that way, that it's all clear. That's part of my job. This is one example of me make things perfectly clear. Another myth is that only language deprived need CDIs. So we often grow up looking at hearing interpreters, and we understand them, and remember just that hearing interpreters are getting stuff into L2, so they never reach the mastery. But that's been our model of language, even with the mistakes. Often we see their signs, and it means that we should have to sign the same way. I don't need to do the work. I shouldn't have to do the work. But a deaf interpreter, with a hearing interpreter, when it's L2, I think I have to do the work and make the translation. And then I think, thank you for interpreting for me, but yet I've done all the work. But now, with a deaf interpreter, I get the link, and yet I, as a consumer, don't have to do any of the work. So now let's go ahead talk about what your suggestions are for the future. Whoever our new president is for RID, what do you think is best for the future? You mean the RID president, right? Yeah, what do you think is best for the future? Before we get to the future, we've got to figure out what's happened in the past. We've got to look back in the past and figure out why things happened the way they did. We can't just go ahead and hope for the best with our new ideas and be Pollyanna about it. We've got to look things at the foundation. What's the root? We've got to sit down and dialogue everything. Think about what happened. And that dialogue will then lead to the ideas for the vision of our future. We can't just go ahead with ideas while we still got these issues, all this baggage remaining in our past. This is like I said before. RID is a hearing space. It is a hearing space. We have 16,000 hearing interpreters or certified, or 300, 400 deaf members. So we have deaf members coming into a hearing space, which is something to be aware of and to understand the history of what's happened and why we're doing this. Why are we doing this? Because of what's happened in the past. We got to look back in the past and the lessons that they've taught us, so we can try to make things better, so we can partner more. The one thing is we'll know for sure we're going to have a deaf president, but that doesn't mean the problems are going to be solved. Nay, it'll be just the beginning. Just the beginning of what's best for our future. So, any thoughts? About how to bring things to the CEO, star, to get a feel of how the office feels after the election. Is that going to happen? Are there actually be talks with the CEO and the office? Will they be an exchange of ideas of the plus and minuses? I can't speak for Star, but I'm confident that Star is very, very aware of what's about the situation. My assumption would be that they're going to talk with have several meetings so we can figure out how to approach it. I think RD has come to a very definitive crossroads about what the future is going to look like. And it's important for this organization to survive. There has to be change. I can't envision us doing the same thing over again after what's happened up to now. Change is pertinent. But what it'll look like and how it's going to happen is something I'm not sure about. If RD is not willing to change and saying what will happen, it will not survive. It will drift off. It'll be painful. Yeah, change is painful, just like Ritchie mentioned before. Yes, it's going to be painful. It means we got to go back and figure out what happened. It means all of the members as a group are going to have to do some deep dive of who they are and talk about these different issues. And in doing this soul searching, then they can then already continue on as well. We can't just go ahead. We've got to go back, figure out what the issues were, and then go on. I feel Star is cognizant of this. And will help, and she and the board will continue working on this. NAD started the RD and then they broke apart. Is it because of hearing that RD is a hearing space? Is that why it broke apart from NAD? Does anyone want to mention? Anyone to talk about that? I don't know. Well, it's very complicated. There's no simple black and white reason about the causes of why things happened. There's a lot of layers, facets that come across us in the story. NAD, of course, is deaf centered. It's a deaf center. RID is hearing centered. So when you're trying to put together, often there's conflict. Yes, there's conflict. Whoever becomes president of RID, whoever that is, I hope they'll make contact with NID. Not to say we're right, but contact NID. Not just alone, not just them. Contact the Rainbow Coalition. Contact the people of color. Contact, we can all work together. That's the vision, not just NAD. Yeah, NAD is important, but it's not the only one. You've got to have all deaf Americans involved. Invite everyone to the table. We need a diverse people at the table. So RD is able to serve everyone better. I agree. How can things in RD remain positive even when you get this attitudinal conflicts? How do you confront that? How would you remain positive? Well, you got to start with your local chapter. For me, Georgia RID. I don't know about Georgia RID. I've been involved, a member of Georgia RID. I went to their conference and I got involved, and the issues they had there, RID talked about it, and they made things about empowering to the group. We need to talk to just the group, not just one on one. And then by that level, you can get to the regional level and talk to at the regional level. And then from the regional level, you can go to the national level. That's what I think about. That's the strategy I would think. RID is not well. If you try to propose make a motion to RID, that's wrong. Then you feel like you are at a loss. It's better to start at a local level and to build it from there, so that the idea can have movement by the time it gets up to the national level. My advice to the RID board: you can't leave anything, no stone unturned. You got to go through the whole thing from top to bottom, or from bottom to top. It's the concept of organizational structure. You got to go from bottom to top instead of top to bottom. So if you start from the bottom and go your way up, what's that going to look like? And also, we need to transfer things over to a professional certified organization. There are many different possibilities and options on the table of how we can do that. So Regan made a comment. She's saying, yes, we can't have a president of RD telling us members and board there's no autism. So the DI president did a huge step in the right direction of validating the deaf community and its deaf members. And then I think we had another question. Regan saying, great job, guys. Thank you, Regan. Joe said, why not make a union? Again, if you want a union, you need to have a structural change. I'm not well versed on the idea of unions, but unions are very, very strong in local levels. If it's at the national level or not, what if they have to make changes to the bylaws? That's really out of my field. That's not in my knowledge base. So Joe, unions are wrong. I understand that, but if RID is actually an employment placement employment, like let's say you use IBM, right? Or Apple. Okay, Apple. So Apple's a company. If RID became like Apple, and then everyone signed contracts, and they had workers working under them, if they had employment, then a union would be a different idea. But RID is not a placement employment. It's not an employing organization. It is completely different. It's a completely different planet. I like the idea of having a union, yeah, but it just really wouldn't work in this instance. I hope it clears things up for you. Yeah, Joe. That makes it. Hope that clears things up for you. You don't need to really tell me about rates, but I'm wondering, do interpreters and CDIs, are they making the same rates? Like, do they have the 2-hour minimums for interpreters? Is it the same? Just be transparent. Oh, okay. I'm back. I think transparency is important. The rates vary. Rates vary based on certification that you have, based on the number of years you've been interpreting. What the specialty is. For example, here in Georgia, Alabama has MHIT, so it's mental health interpreting training. So you train there and you get your Q qualification. That's kind of a certificate. And I've been certified 11 years. And my race, so when I lived in Boston, when I moved here, my rates lowered quite dramatically when I moved here to Georgia because the cost of living here is different. It measures things very different. So it's really different. Again, agencies here, a contract, for example, it's low, but in agencies, this includes mileage. The travel time is included. So I didn't realize that. I wasn't believed by that. In Massachusetts, we had a standard formula. And if you were less than 20 miles away, you couldn't charge. You couldn't charge the mileage. You couldn't the time rate. So, but the rate was higher. Here, the rate's lower, but you get paid more. So I realized, it's all okay. It's comfortable. It's all varies by state, varies from where you go. Since I had the MHIT training, I've done that twice, and I got my Q certification. My rate went up. So again, it all really varies. The rates vary. I can safely assume that the rates between the hearing and deaf interpreters are different. I think it's safe to assume that. Our time has run out. So, do you have any more questions from the audience? Seems no. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up before we close? Anything else you'd like to say? In closing, I'd like to make this point. Everyone, for years in your involvement, I hope that we together can push RID to the next level. Yes, it's true. Our RID has made mistakes in the past, and in the future, we'll still make mistakes. But what's more importantly, that we need to be willing to make everyone accountable. And accountable doesn't mean you're going to criticize someone. Accountable means there's something wrong with this, and ask them how we're going to fix it. That's what it means to be accountable. I think that's what it's all about. Mikey or Jason, is anything you want to add? If you're interested in becoming an interpreter, or you feel you're qualified to be an interpreter, I encourage you to take workshops. Check out workshops. If you know any deaf interpreter in your area, ask them where workshops may lie, reach out to them because we need to see you. We've had to come out and we have to make contact to we need you to make contact with us. So if you have the motivation and you want to be involved, and then if you realize that's not what you want to interpret, you want to be an advocate, it's something completely different. You can't do both. You have to separately. Being advocate means you can encourage. And we need advocates as well, just like we need interpreters, but they're just two different entities. Jason, I encourage you, any deaf interpreters who are wondering if you should take the CDI, to do it. Go for it. I believe certification is critical. And shows people that we really have that we have proof and verification of our skills, and we meet the minimum standards. And it's something to show that you're recognized for the work that you do. Some states also require licensure. It's part of their state law. So I encourage you, if you're on the fence about if you should go for a certification, do it. Go for a certification. We need to expand the pool. I think we look on the RID, it's like 197 CDIs. At last count that I saw was 197. The numbers have gone up and have wavered a bit up and down, but we need those numbers to go up for CDIs. We need more certified deaf interpreters. Thank you for this update of what's been happening. We appreciate that. And I want to thank the audience as well. Ronelle, does anything you want to say in closing? Thank you, the three of you, talking about CDI and RID, the situation RID. I hope we continue to have these meetings in the future. I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you all so much. Thanks. Good night. Thank you.
But also the iconic apotheosis of George Washington, members of Congress, their staff, and the millions of people who annually visit the U.S. Capitol.
Freedom, and we're going to see a model of her up close in the Capitol Visitor Center. Come on.
The historic Capitol building is the crypt,